evening, everyone. My name is Quandra Spates, and I will be your co-host today with Patrick Brutus. We represent Help One Save One, and you're watching a live interactive show here on CAN-TV 21. If you have any comments or questions, we encourage you to please dial in to 312-738-1060. Once again, that's 312-738-1060. Help One Save One is a community-inspired organization, and one of our main objectives is to educate and empower the community with information designed to inform and enlighten. Over the next several weeks, it is our intent to create a progressive series of informative discussions regarding our journey as African American people by examining where we once were, where we wanted to be, and where we are today. This April has become a significant month in Black history as it commemorates the life and legacy for one of our heroes, MLK. Dr. King was assassinated 50 years ago this month on April 4th, 1968. He is recognized as one of the leaders of the civil rights movement that started in the 50s. As you all may know, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. But what you may not know is that in 1968, a month before the death of MLK, a report was released by Lyndon Johnson, then U.S. President, called the Kerner Commission Report, where Mr. Otto Kerner was charged with investigating the causes of 1967 race riots in the United States as a result of the Civil Rights Movement. How did these riots occur? Who were the instigating actors and forces behind the movement, and how do we prevent it from happening again? So, with that, we're going to start today. Let's just jump right in. Patrick Brutus is going to introduce our guest.
Hi, good evening, Chicago. We're very happy to be here this evening with our special guest, Robert McKay. Robert McKay is an expert on civil rights issues, Black history, and we're very glad to have him here. Aren't we, Quandra?
Absolutely.
And so we're going to just jump right in. Quandra referenced the Kerner Commission report of 1968. The Kerner Commission, Robert, concluded that pervasive poverty and racism were major causes of the unrest that led to the race riots during the 1960s. Can you tell us how it's possible that 50 years later, those two societal ills are still prevalent today in America and causing the same unrest? Let's get into the book.
Well, actually, what Quandra mentioned in her introduction was that in 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. Mm-hmm. And in that act, originally, there were two protected classes, blacks of African descent and Native Americans. And since that report was released, or that it was signed, we've included ourselves into a group that we should not be in, minorities.
Right.
We're not minorities, we're not immigrants, migrants, settlers, refugees, or aliens. And that's a group that should be identified as minorities if they're going to do that. Now, when President Johnson signed that, and he went on to get other acts, included the Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act, and what have you. Now, immigrants who come here are not required. The Voting Rights Act doesn't have to be renewed every 20 years to allow them to vote, only for us, because we, as a people, were not originally citizens of this country. We were property. In fact, the property ownership, when emancipation came, was transferred from the slave owners to the government, because the government compensated each slave owner who lost their slaves. I think I don't know the exact figure, I don't remember it, but I know it's somewhere in the $300 range. They were paid for losing their slave ownership. Now, as we fast forward, because in the coming weeks you're going to cover many topics addressing our history, and this history should be taught. There's a law in the state of Illinois that requires, but has not been complied with, requires that Black history be taught in the public school system in Illinois, as House Bill 2859, I believe.
And I believe it was also passed in the 1970s.
1991. 1991, that was passed, right. So, because your history is very important. It's said that if you don't know your history, you don't repeat it, and that's what we're doing now. The plight that we went through in the 60s and the 50s and 40s and going all the way back to emancipation and even getting on those slave ships coming here, it's still all connected. Now, getting to the Kerner Commission report, in the 60s, 66, 65, 67, the riots were occurring because people were unrest. They were at unrest because, then we call them uprisings, because same thing was going on in South Africa, basically apartheid. Because certain neighborhoods you weren't allowed to go into, and the segregation part, but we never said, and even Dr. King stated that, I believe that we've integrated into a burning building, in the system. So here we are with the Kerner Commission report. After 1 year, because he put that group together in July of 1967, and they completed it in February of 1968.
Right, and it was released shortly before his assassination.
It was released on March 1st, 1968, a month and 3 days before Dr. King's assassination. And I'm sure had he lived, he would have addressed that Kerner Commission report and would have pushed it through. And even, we have groups now fighting for reparations. We may, out of that report, had it been pushed properly, reparations would have, we may have seen ourselves into reparations now.
Actually, it looks like we may have a caller. Caller, please. You have a question or a comment?
First time viewer, great show. I agree with the gentleman that's talking 100%. Instead of giving all the money, free education, and all the rest of the benefits to the DACA people, I'm Mexican American, and I can't stand that. They should be giving it to African American and other U.S. citizens, the money toward them, reparations or whatever you call it. But I'm tired of the DACA people getting free education, free everything, schooling, and they don't have to pay for anything. They even get a safe zone, a sanctuary city. Well, for all the rest of us citizens of Chicago, there isn't a safe zone, north, south, east, or west. We're getting shot at all the time, and yet the mayor is going to go and protect DACA people. No. Give it to the people that deserve it. That's who you give it to, and forget about DACA. And then I have to ask you a question, sir. Why is it that...
Can you speak up? I can barely hear you.
Okay, why is it... You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, why is it that the mayor thinks that he could get away with stuff like DACA, and African American, legal Mexican Americans, and all the other legal people here won't say anything? That's terrible. I'm tired of it. I'm a 70-year-old Vietnam veteran. I fought for my country. I didn't fight for people that don't belong here in the first place. Give it to our people first.
Thank you, caller. We understand your question. Basically, he's talking about why are DACA recipients being afforded many liberties and access to what we would consider services that would be provided first towards citizens versus those who are illegal citizens. Which also brings me to another question regarding the Kerner Commission and the updated report that came out last week called "The Healing Our Divided Society." Now, this it's relative. If the updated report specifically says that they should add other groups such as women and their fight for pay equity and immigrants with their call for a pathway to citizenship, how is it that these other groups are included in this updated argument for equality when the original report 50 years ago focused only on black people? So I understand the question, but let's talk a little bit about it more broadly versus pointing fingers. So we're talking about a report that included issue to resolve for black people, but now the updated report focuses on also including other quote-unquote minority groups in the conversation. So I like what you said before, Mr. McKay, about us African Americans not being immigrants, not being minorities. We were a specified singled out class that this report actually focused on. Speak to that, please.
Well, I don't have a problem with DACA or the Dreamers. You know, the Dream Act was initiated, about 10 years ago? I don't know the exact date.
2012, actually.
2012.
Obama administration.
So these people have a right to do what they're doing. They have a right because they've been given access to this system because they were told you can come here and the streets are paved in gold. Some went back to their countries. But here we have groups who legitimately, based on the system is set up, but who should be first in line? This is the government. We were brought here before this country was established.
Right.
They started bringing slaves here in 1619. And of course, that was long before these other DACA, any other groups who came into
Right.
here after it was built with the blood, sweat, and tears of our people who were brought here in ownership.
One could say we were the original dreamers.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't even say that. You know, the original nightmare, because that's what it has turned. We're living a nightmare because dreaming, and I think you might be agreeing with Mason. What's the head of HUD?
Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. I'm thinking of someone else. But anyway, yeah, Ben Carson said that the slaves coming here were living a dream in the bottom of the ships, that they were coming to a free land, a free, of opportunity. And that was not the case. Of course, we're still not living that today.
Right, absolutely.
But of course, this whole process is people who put in positions in government coming from our community. It appears that they've gone through some kind of orientation or some kind of programming to speak to what the system wants them to say to us. Forget about it. Because coming out of the 60s, during the struggles, they presented the affirmative action plan. And there was some people who were going around saying that they were part of getting the affirmative action plan written. And really, that's a nightmare. That's like giving you a book with two covers, front and back, with
no
nothing
words.
and blank pages on the
Right,
inside.
no words.
You're right, no words. And this is what we're living today. That affirmative action plan told us there's no longer a need to struggle, protest, fight for rights.
Right.
So we took that.
Right.
And that's why this millennial generation, is that what they call you all?
That's what they call them.
That's what they call them. But they said the millennials are saying that we let them down. But because we were hoodwinked just like they're being hoodwinked.
Right.
And
Well,
go ahead.
I just have another question just to take it back to the Kerner Commission report.
Yes.
So the report examines how discrimination and segregation could ultimately threaten the future of every American. What is your take on that?
Well, I think when they use language like that, they diminish your argument. That for every American, we're only speaking of one specific group of people who is questioning whether or not you're Americans. We're property of America. So when you have them saying we are, it affects the entire group, because in that, to summarize the report, and everyone should get it and read it and study it. They said there's a problem. We discovered after they came back after that 1 year, that we discovered that the problem is not in the black community. It's the white community. We created it, we condone it, and we maintain it. I'm paraphrasing now. And they said that we have a choice. If you want to help the black community come out of the problems we created, you either help them or get rid of them. And Samuel Lafayette wrote a book, The Choice. I think he published it in 1971 or 70. And he stated in his statement, in his summary, stated that their choice was to get rid of the black community. And there are many people who are going to argue that that's not the case. We'll still be around. But when they shoot to kill, shoot you in the back, or you find Sandra Bland's. There are many Sandra Bland's.
Right.
You only heard about her because she was noted and it made the press. But over in Benton Harbor, Michigan, there are people found hung in jail cells. Find them in the rivers.
Let's hold that thought. We have a caller. Let's go to the caller, shall we? Caller, what's your question?
Hello,
Hello.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, now I'm calling because I used to work for Human Service. When he spoke about the programs that he's talking about, we have had a lot of people who we have helped that was homeless. Once we helped them, found a place for them to live, they wrote us and thanked us because they didn't want that housing. We have to go beyond just saying what people need. We need to do the follow-up to see how the people are processing. Because, see, number one, we're going into a new change. Our kids are so excellent, and most people will not allow to do what we need to do. But I thank God that now I'm seeing things that's going to be working great for all that we're trying to do. We're not just going to stick with one race. We're going to help every human being that we possibly can, because that's what we're here for now. And thank you so much, and God bless each and every one of you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much for that, caller. Did you want to respond to that comment?
No, she said.
Yeah, I thought it was a very poignant comment.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, caller. Well, okay, so just to piggyback off what you were just saying, I have another question also as it relates to the report. The report states that poverty in the inner city has perpetuated a destructive environment that is totally unknown to most white Americans. Do you agree with this notion?
Absolutely. This was done, that report was done completed in 1968. We went through a period where it was...
Don't mean to cut you off. I also want to know, it's a two-part question, and what
Sure.
does that mean to you? What does that insert or that comment means to you?
Well, it was destructive, and we identify these issues, and we have representatives who we elect to go to Congress, they go to city councils, they go to county boards, state,
All the multiple levels of government.
all multiple levels of government, and they go out and it appears that they go out and they go along with the program. Now, we've had representatives of the Dreamers who were elected in office, and we see what they have accomplished in just a few years, since 2012. And there was Congressman Conyers, John Conyers, presented the H.R. 40
Reparations bill?
to Congress to study reparations.
Right.
There was no need to study it. We're living this nightmare. So why were we studying something to give reparations? The other groups receive reparations for the damages occurred to their groups.
Right.
The Japanese,
And even in some way, President Obama also repatriated the Jewish community as well. That's an excellent, we have another exciting first show here today. We have another caller. Caller, what's your question? We can't hear the caller.
Can you hear me better now?
Yes,
Can you hear me
go ahead
better?
with your question or comment.
Can you hear me better now?
You're doing
Yes.
well.
Okay, good. Do you know they said yesterday that when King got killed, there was 1,000 elected officials. They say it's 10,000 now. And why is it that we're not getting why is it that we're not getting things done from 1,000 elected officials to 10,000? Please tell me that.
Great question.
1,000 to 10,000?
he's saying when King was assassinated, there were 1,000 elected officials, and today we have 10,000.
Oh, yes, the explosion of elected offices across
Right.
the country, which would, in theory, lead to more legislators advocating for more people as the population grew over the last 50 years. And why aren't we getting more things done? you could, opine on that, but it's probably just more business as usual, All the industrial complexes, all the, the different special interests have taken over.
Yeah, it's business as usual, but we have our own community doing the business on us.
Right.
Right.
We have 10,000-fold elected officials from 10 times as many elected officials than when Dr. King was murdered. And here we are today, worse. The unemployment in Illinois in the black community is worse than it was, or as bad as it was back then.
Well,
So I'm just going to say,
ahead.
just with that thought, just my last question. With that in mind, what is your take on inner city violence, poverty, and racial division? And do you believe it's a drain on our society?
Of course, it's a drain on the society, but it helps some systems go because the pipeline to prison is very lucrative to private investors. And we're living, and I'll say it, White House terrorism, because Nixon declared that we will place guns and drugs in the black community and watch it disintegrate. Now that's on his tapes. We can pull up his tapes. Perhaps the next show you can have his recordings on here where you can hear some of the things that he expressed about the black community and with drugs. He was going to identify heroin with blacks and marijuana with hippies. And somehow someone took on the mandate to continue his proclamation.
Interesting. I'm sorry, were you about to?
I mean, I just think that's terrible that, 50 years later, we have the same issues that affect our community. And in fact, in many places, the situation for black people where we live, work, and play has in fact gotten worse.
But if we were more proficient at history and education and reading, I remember I heard just yesterday, they're still playing Dr. King's speech where he says, somewhere I read, and he's talking about how the legislation in this country is supposed to be equal and balanced for everyone. And he was comparing to what we're living here in our community to what goes on in Korea or North Korea or the Soviet Union, because we have no rights. So, but then this is what we continue to fight. Now, when you have organizations, churches that were once used were the pipeline to freedom, but they've been shut off, they've been bought out. These elected officials, he talks about 10,000 who elected now in our community, but they go in, they get a stipend to continue the mandate of the system to keep us suppressed as a people. So until we can unelect, get our people voting, many of us say that there's no reason to vote, we can't get anything from voting, but those that locally, if we can get the people in office to represent our people justly,
Right.
then that would spread.
Absolutely.
Mr. McKay, I'm going to ask a question that might already have an answer be given to us, but what do you say for in Illinois, where we have the largest assembly of black elected legislators, where in our state the condition for black people is arguably the highest in the nation?
And we need to wrap this up, but if you can answer that quickly, that will be
Well,
great.
here in Illinois,
in 10 seconds.
just speaking here in Illinois, it's our community elected officials are corrupt as the system itself. And in every office, we need to examine and begin to eradicate these people out of office, because none of them has represented our community the way it's supposed to be.
And for a final note on our first show, I like to read an excerpt, a quote from Dr. Kenneth B. Clark, who was a witness who testified before the Kerner Commission in 1968. And these are his words. He said, "I read that report of the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it is as if I were reading the report of the investigating committee on the Harlem riot of 1935, the report of the investigating committee on the Harlem riot of 1943, the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must again in candor say to you members of this commission, it is a kind of Alice in Wonderland, with the same moving picture re-shown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendations, and the same inaction. We have more work to do, people. We have more to accomplish, and still more to overcome. Quandra?
Well, with that being said, we would like to thank you all for watching us today. Once again, we want to thank our guest, Robert McKay. Thank you, Patrick Brutus, for being here with us and co-hosting. And hopefully you will tune in next week, Thursday at 5:30. Thank you.